Chair lays out Senate Bill 105 by Senator Johnson, the most interesting bill today, I think, and recognizes Senator Johnson to explain his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. We're talking about alkaline hydrolysis, also known as water cremation, also known as green cremation, flameless cremation, chemical cremation, liquid cremation, aquamation, biocremation, and resomation. What we're talking about is an alternative way of disposing of our remains. We're all going to have to someday face the question of what happens to our remains or the remains of our loved ones. There is a method out there, it's being used in more than half the states in America, called water cremation and the other names I mentioned, that has many advantages in terms of energy consumption. Other people believe there are other qualities to it. It's simply one of many options that people have to dispose of their remains. Traditional methods are burial and flame cremation. Water cremation is competitive from a cost standpoint to flame cremation, depending on where you are. It's far cheaper than burial cremation, and many people simply believe it's the right thing to do for environmental or personal reasons, including the quality of the ash. Why on earth are we up here having a discussion about it? Because the law in Texas is not clear as to whether or not this is a legal or illegal practice to perform in the state of Texas. This bill would clarify that it is, in fact, a legal option to be provided. It's already happening in Texas in academic institutions. It's already happening in other states. There are already people, families, or individuals who choose to have their remains cremated under alkaline hydrolysis by exporting their body to another state and bringing the ashes back. It doesn't make sense for us to suppress, in this case, a market for services that people want about very personal decisions about what to do with their remains once they're gone. This bill would remove any question as to the legality of people making that very, very personal decision.
Thank you, Senator.
I think we ought to pass
Members'
it.
questions? Senator Birdwell.
Senator Johnson, as much as it pains me to have a discussion about cremation, I do have one question based on you said that some folks go out of state and then their remains are brought back. But the way I understood the bill is that with a water-based cremation, that the remains are actually put into the wastewater distribution system. The only remains are the skeletal remains.
That's correct.
So if there's a water cremation, then the only thing returning back is the skeletal remains, but they're not flame. Those are not flame cremated.
They are distinct from flame cremated, but they're very, very similar. In the flame cremation process, most of what is our body is dissipated into the atmosphere. What is remained is very close to just skeletal remains. Right. It's a slightly purer form of remains through the water process.
Most of our body is liquid, so it's evaporated when.
And other molecules of our bodies are not reduced to ash, but they are released into the atmosphere as something other than water vapor. So they're actually quite comparable, and I'm glad you brought up the biology of this not very fun topic.
No, it's not. But
less fun for some than others. But the actual process of water cremation very closely mimics what happens in the earth in a burial process over a much longer period of time. The heat of the water and chemicals that are put into the water accelerate that process. You also raise, indirectly, but I think importantly, the question of what happens to everything else. In the case of flame cremation, it's in the atmosphere. In the case of water cremation, it does go into sewer systems. That has been a concern in the past. There's been plenty of studies on it. It's not only okay, it actually in some cases is beneficial to local water treatment systems.
My staff had given me that note, and I'm like, how's the effluent beneficial to something to do with pH? But
that's the extent of my knowledge as well.
Yeah, but it's really more. For me, the issue is really more about the right of conscience of the individual, whether they wish to be buried according to their religious sentiments or non-religious sentiments. I wanted a clear picture. You mentioned that the law is not clear, but some folks are doing it in state, other folks are taking it out of state to be done, and your attempt here is simply to clarify its clear legality so that those that that may be choosing this are not, that in the state are not having to actually evacuate to other states, and that those that are doing it in the state are not subject to some criminality or some other civil or criminal sanction.
That's exactly right. Senator Birdwell, you've laid out the bill far better than I have, quite honestly, and I really appreciate you raising those issues. I do believe we're going to have some testimony in support of the bill. Is that right, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
And so I'll withhold further explanation and allow the witnesses to.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Senator Campbell?
Just I'm not sure how the effluent is a welcome addition to the water system.
And
I thought that was an interesting statement, but without really a comment or answer to that, I'm very happy to support even, this is something I definitely can get behind for a green effort and decrease the carbon footprint. So I really had never heard of it, and I think it's good.
thank you, Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair opens up public testimony and calls Eric Newhouse and Joshua Houston. And we have Sarah Rossick and Jennifer Allman. Those are the four that have registered to testify. Mr. Newhouse.
Good morning. My name's Eric Newhouse. I am the founder and owner of Green Cremation, Texas, here in Austin, Texas. Thank you for having me. I am testifying in support of SB105. I founded this company with one core purpose, which is championing families and intently listening to what is meaningful to them and doing everything possible to support them. Since inception, we have flown hundreds of families out of state who have chosen this process for their own loved ones for various reasons. If passed, we're able to offer this process in the state at a price roughly half of the national average price for flame cremation. I would like to quickly touch on the idea that the effluent is introduced back into the sewer system. That is part of the process. There were some questions about how it is beneficial to the water treatment plant. I am not a water treatment expert, so I will not comment directly on those. However, there are plenty of studies which we can provide to any of the committee members. With respect to the effluent being introduced, I would like to quickly touch on the process of embalming, which also does, every time embalming occurs, bodily fluid is introduced into the sewer system, and that is a process that is largely accepted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Members' questions? Ms. Rossick?
Good morning, Senator Shortner and members of the Senate Committee on Business and Commerce. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Sarah Rossick. I live in Manor. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and here to show support of Senate Bill 105, adding alkaline hydrolysis to current cremation law. As a human, we need sustainable options of disposition available to everyone. Currently, each year, we use over 800,000 gallons of toxic formaldehyde and thousands of tons of casket-making material for other burials. We know fuel prices are increasing, and flame cremation comes with additional carbon emissions. Adding alkaline hydrolysis for disposition alleviates the burden on precious materials, uses a fraction of the energy, and less than 15% emissions than that of flame cremation. As we've mentioned, it does actually help clean the water. As I understand, we are broken down to aminos, sugars, salts, and peptides. And by raising the alkaline, that actually helps clean the water process. That is the extent of my knowledge. As a human resources professional, I can appreciate the need for a safe work environment. By approving alkaline hydrolysis, you help create that for Texans working in death care. This removes the exposure to burns, smoke inhalation, and explosions from pacemakers. This also helps reduce the need for embalming, a procedure that exposes workers to bloodborne pathogens and toxic chemicals. Lastly, for me, alkaline hydrolysis empowers me with the choice for a greener, gentler way of returning to the earth after my death. With this option in my own death plan, I could feel good about maintaining a smaller carbon footprint in death as I choose to live my life. However, as of now, this option only adds cost for my family as it would require sending me out of state. For all of these reasons, I urge you to please vote in favor of Senate Bill 105. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Houston?
Thank you, Chairman. I am Joshua Houston, Advocacy Director for Texas Impact, and we support Senate Bill 105. Texas Impact is the membership organization for the state's mainline Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim denominations. Our members have a diversity of funeral practices which are closely connected to their religious belief. Those practices include the final disposition of a person's remains. While they do not agree theologically on how a person should be finally laid to rest, they do agree that one religious tradition should not impose their beliefs on another. They also agree that government should let them practice their beliefs absent a compelling state interest, such as a public health or a safety reason. Some of our members brought water cremation to our attention because, as a matter of conscience, they believe it is a religious duty to care for God's creation. Water cremation uses no fossil fuel, is 90% more energy efficient, and doesn't use additional land, wood, concrete, or steel. We see no compelling reason for the state to prohibit the practice. We found no public health concern in our research, nor did policymakers in 26 other states. This bill is permissive, it's not a mandate. Whether the process is respectful of the human body is a decision best left to the wishes of the deceased and the deceased loved ones. We see this bill as an opportunity to ensure that our funeral laws honor our nation's commitment to religious freedom. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, sir. Members' questions? Ms. Allman, welcome.
My name is Jennifer Allman, and I'm the Executive Director of a Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops, and I'm testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 105. We oppose this bill because the dehydration of human remains in a vat of chemicals is disrespectful to the human body, and this legislature has expressed a profound respect for human life and human remains through the passage of multiple laws over time expressing that position. On a basic level, traditional cremation and alkyne hydrolysis introduce the remnants of the human body into the world in drastically different manners. In the incineration method, the gaseous remains of the chemical reaction are introduced directly back into the atmosphere. But in alkyne hydrolysis, the liquid remains are discharged into the municipal sewer system. This is exactly the practice that this legislature ended in 2017 for fetal remains because of the respect for human remains. We believe that same principle should apply across the life spectrum. The means to the end matter. Throughout history and across cultures, there have been two main ways of properly disposing of human remains: burial and fire cremation. Throughout history and across cultures, there has not been the adoption of boiling the human body in a pot until the flesh separates from the bone and then pulverizing the bone remains. That might be fine for cleaning a deer skull, but we believe that human remains require a greater level of respect and that it is appropriate for the state to express that respect. We must treat the remains of all human beings, no matter how long they lived or how they died, with dignity, charity, and respect. Chemical digestion of the human body fails to follow that simple principle. Making it a legal choice to flush most of a person's body down the sewer will contribute to a coarsened attitude toward the dead. We've seen these bills in other states. Our conferences have opposed them in other states, and particularly in Chicago and Illinois, where this has happened, they've had a significant problem with people who have purchased a columbarium slot for their cremation ash remains, and the water cremation remains do not fit in the columbarium slots. This creates a cost for our cemeteries, who then have to produce new columbariums to hold the different type of remains that come from water cremation. The funeral homes and the cemeteries in Texas are simply not set up for this at this time. Our respect for the dignity of the dead is an extension of our respect for the dignity of the living. People with and without faith have always understood that, and it is evident among the burial practices of civilized people throughout time and across the world. For this committee to approve this method of disposition would be a direct contradiction to the state's profound respect for human life and human remains as expressed by other laws. I urge you to oppose Senate Bill 105.
Thank you, Ms. Allman. Members' questions? Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Allman. Of all the good work you all do, I'm rather surprised that your organization would take a position on a matter so personal as this. For how long did the Catholic Church oppose flame cremation?
The Catholic Church changed.
As a doctrinal matter.
In 1963, the Catholic Church issued a grudging permission to allow burial of cremated remains, but it it was not accepted as an appropriate practice, but a grudging practice, because we will bury any remains someone brings to us, regardless of the method of the how the remains arrive. So in the case of a death at sea, we would bury at sea if necessary, if there's mass casualty at sea. It wouldn't be our preference. We wouldn't express it in law by going into statute and saying it should be done this way, but we would allow it because fundamentally we believe in the proper burial of human remains regardless. It's the same reason in 2017 when we had the discussion of fetal burial that we offered to bury any remains brought to us from abortion facilities because we believe those remains should be buried. And so we offered at no cost to do so, and we have done so even as recently as the last few months.
How long did the Catholic Church oppose flame cremation?
Until 1963.
So 2,000 years?
Well, 1,963.
Why the change of doctrine?
It isn't really a change of doctrine.
It seems that you opposed it, and now you don't.
No, there's different levels of Catholic teaching in terms of doctrine and dogma and but theologically the discussion today is not about doctrine versus dogma. The discussion today is about the state's role. And Catholics, there's 9 million Catholics in Texas. The bishops asked me to come here and express our position today in order to add our voice to the public debate about the issue. Ultimately, it is the choice of the legislature and the committee to determine what you think are appropriate means for the disposition of the human body to go into Texas statute, and that reflects the overall position of the state. And we recognize that we are one voice among many.
And in we, do you mean 9 million, or do you mean some subset of 9 million?
I'm speaking on behalf of the Roman Catholic bishops of Texas. There are 23, 24, we've had a new one coming in a couple of weeks, there'll be 24 active bishops of Texas who are the pastors of the 9.3 million Catholics.
Should a casket be closed or open at a funeral?
We're
We're talking about a burial, I'm sorry.
At a burial?
For a body that has not been cremated, should we have an open casket or a closed casket?
I'm not sure how that relates to the content of the bill.
Does the church have a position on that question?
I do not know the church's position on what to do with cremated remains in terms of an open casket or a closed casket. The cremated remains are traditionally in an urn.
We're not talking about cremated remains. What we're talking about, and this seemingly particular, almost trivial bill, has some broader implications about what degree one set of beliefs from one branch of one religion is going to, what implication it's going to have for state law. And I don't hear anybody else anywhere who's objecting to this process. I don't see Hindus trying to pass a law to ban the consumption of beef. I don't see Muslims requiring that everybody eat halal, or
We're
Jews
not
requiring
asking to
separate
pass a
containers for
law.
refrigerators. You're objecting to a law.
And
It
I have
makes
a right to
something
do so as a member of
course
the
you have a
public
right.
in this committee.
You absolutely have a right. I'm just astounded that the position would be to take a very narrow belief of a small number of people and impose it upon. You're sitting next to somebody for whom this type of cremation is a far more meaningful end than flame cremation or traditional cremation or anything espoused by the church. And that's her decision.
And she has a
Not-
right to express her decision and has done so.
If approved, only.
Well,
Right now, she can't.
I mean, the purpose of a legislative hearing is that we each come and express our position before the legislature, and this body will take a vote and determine if this proceeds to the Senate floor, and the Senate will take a vote.
Well aware of the
We're not-
process.
We're not expressing any undue political pressure on anyone beyond telling our viewpoint. This is our position. I recognize you profoundly disagree with it, as do the people
And
seated
profound
around you.
disagreements are good, but what's not good
Right.
is when somebody imposes a doctrinal view onto a legislative process.
I have not expressed a doctrinal view. I have not expressed a single catechism quote. I have not discussed a quote from Pope Francis. I have specifically talked about burial and what different civilizations believe about burial. I have not specifically said where in the catechism we come to this position. That is not before the committee today. We are not here to discuss the catechism. We're discussing the viewpoint, the right of the Catholic bishops to express our position before this committee on the profound respect of human life. I do it daily, multiple times a day, in multiple committees. I would believe I've testified before every single member of this committee in multiple settings for the last 20 years doing this. And this committee may well vote against me. And the legislature has voted against us many, many, many times.
And Ms.
So-
Allman, we welcome you back. You've done some great work. I just want to make sure we keep an appropriate wall between church and state.
And I believe that the members of this committee will do so when they make their independent decisions.
Thank you.
Thank y'all both. Members, other questions of Ms. Allman or anyone on the panel? Senator Birdwell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if that's a question or really or just maybe I can help illuminate the situation a bit if members of the committee would appreciate it, but just a refined sense of where we are. Ms. Allman, because when I first read it, as while I was being humorous about cremation, having tried that once, and it was a very unpleasant experience. I share the concern about, the respect to life. Let me share with the committee the situation that came before me in a media event about 5 years after September 11th, maybe 6 years. There were still human remains from the Pentagon still at the Air Force Institute of Pathology that could not be identified from Flight 77. I shouldn't say Flight 77, could not be identified as to whether or not who the individual was. And out of the 184 people killed, not including the terrorists, 189 including the terrorists, the Air Force Institute of Pathology could not determine who these remains belonged to. And the Air Force Institute of Pathology, and this is why I had the media interview, decided to discard those in the trash. And that shocked the sense of those of us that are professing believers. I'm not Catholic, but a professing believer as you are. That in not knowing what is the proper disposition, and the proper disposition would have been burial at sea, because if they are Americans, you've given them a respectful burial. You can't determine if they're the terrorists that crashed Flight 77 in the Pentagon. Still a human life. I mean, Osama's somewhere in the Indian Ocean right now. So there's a clear respect, I believe, of the Catholic Church's view that we don't want to be disrespectful of human life. In the first Gulf War, we did an immense amount of killing of Iraqi soldiers. We were proud of how professional we were, but there was no joy in the death. In this case, I think we're trying to balance what is a right of conscience, and that while I both asked my staff and Senator Johnson, what does this really mean? And the imagery of the liquefied elements going down the sewer is as I share with you, the initial that strikes me as what would, I think your word, disrespectful. But I think our first obligation is the right of conscience of the family, and the difference between what we did, I think you mentioned it as 2017, that said this is how we bury. And in fact, Senator Watson, if memory serves me correctly, Senator Watson had an amendment that would allow the family to bury the aborted child according to their religious sentiments, that Senator Seliger and I supported because of the nature of our absolute respect for right of religious sentiment. So I think that's why we have a different standard for the child. But in this case, the citizen that chooses this, well, I would profoundly disagree with this choice. It is a right of conscience question related to religious sentiment. And so I very healthy respect for your view, because the first reaction is, what are we doing here? There are people that even being secular is a religious point of view. It's a rejection of a religious point of view, and that point of view is something that we also have to respect. And so I hope I've helped the committee understand this a little bit, because I have an immense amount of respect for what you're telling me. But I also have to respect the fact that there may be other folks out there that would want to make this choice. So it is from that perspective that while I don't have as similar reaction to your testimony as Senator Johnson, I have a healthy respect for it. But my first oath is to the protection of religious sentiment, and that includes those that reject our particular worldview of faith and the Almighty, that might choose this for different reasons. So I wanted you to know that your testimony is welcome, and that it wasn't trying to be humorous. I guess I was trying to be humorous about cremation, but I've seen a lot of death in my life, and going to a lot more funerals at my age right now than I was earlier. And I think we've got to be very careful to respect the wishes of the adult that can make this decision on their own, or should it be a minor child, that the parent or the guardian can make that decision as it relates to this. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I hope that I've been
Thank you, Senator Birdwell.
helpful. Thank you.
Other
Thank you,
comments,
ma'am.
questions, members? Thank you, panel. Senator Johnson, thank you, sir. Senate Bill 105 is going to be left pending.